In 2016, my boyfriend and I went camping in eastern Pennsylvania. The place we decided to stop for the night was primitive. Camping was free, no cell service, barely a road, etc. We did encounter 2 other people. They might not factor into what happened later at all, but they were creepy, so I'll describe them. The first was a woman who had her truck off to the side of the road a little as we drove past. She had the hood open and seemed to be waiting for someone to stop and offer to help. Usually, my boyfriend had no problem helping someone, but he said something about her put him off. She didn't really seem like she needed help, and usually people who need help look at you hopefully as you approach. She looked like she just expected we would stop. That's what my boyfriend said anyway. I hadn't really noticed anything that strange about her. The next person came when we had chosen a spot and were setting up a fire for hot dogs. I had noticed people drive by a few times, but my boyfriend pointed out each time was the same car, and the man in the car watched us each time he passed. My boyfriend was a little uneasy about this, but we had driven around for a while before finding a place we liked. It had been raining and everything was muddy, and we wanted the driest site possible. He could have been doing the same thing. We briefly thought about moving, but the road was muddy too. If he wanted to find us, all he had to do was follow the tracks. There were some other tracks, but not many. He'd only have to backtrack a little to locate us again. He didn't come by another time, so we stayed and spent the several remaining hours before dark goofing off. No one else drove by. Whether or not those 2 had anything else to do with our experience, the real fear came later. We had gone to sleep in our tent, and sometime around 3 a.m. we were awoken by this very loud noise. I can't describe it very well or even remember exactly what it sounded like, but my boyfriend said it reminded him of a chain gun revving up. It was also similar to how it would sound if someone recorded a shovel being dragged over gravel and played it over a loudspeaker, is another way he described it. He jumped up and looked out the little window, but couldn't really see anything. The sound repeated itself another few times. I was too scared to speak, so my boyfriend whispered that it was probably miles off and I should go back to sleep. I didn't question this, as I figured loud sounds could be easily heard miles off. After we left, he told me it sounded like it had actually been coming from just down the road, but he didn't want to freak me out. Looking back, I probably should have wondered why he would bother to whisper if apparently the sound was far off. I was still terrified. Every little thing I heard outside sounded like someone was walking around the tent. We laid there for a while longer when finally my boyfriend told me to get dressed because we were leaving. I got alarmed by this, and even more alarmed when he unwrapped the machete we had bought just for this trip from its plastic before opening the tent. We quickly packed up and loaded the car. I looked around for footprints that weren't our own, but despite the moon providing plenty of light, I couldn't really see. I did point out something my boyfriend hadn't noticed though before we got into the car. There was a beer can by our dead fire that hasn't been there before. We didn't even bring beer. While we were driving away, my boyfriend explained that he was nervous someone might have been trying to lure us out, so he didn't think it was a good idea to run from the tent right away. He also half expected to find out gas tank had been siphoned out, but that wouldn't have stopped us because we had a hybrid car. We joked that that would make a funny hybrid commercial. Number of brutal murders avoided by driving a hybrid. 2. We only joked because we were about shitting ourselves from fear and adrenaline even then. Not a ranger, but I used to be in a group that's somewhat like the Scouts, so we spent a lot of time in the woods and some weird shit happened often. But most of the time, it was easy to explain. One thing happened though, that to this day scares the living shit out of me. I was a leader for the age group 8 to 10 years old, and we were out on a camping trip. It was the first year we stayed on that terrain, and it was huge. Normally, we tend to explore the majority of a terrain before the kids arrive, so we were aware of any possible dangerous spots to avoid. This time, it was impossible. Every camp, we have what we call a night game. It's usually a scary game in which the kids have to complete several tasks while the leaders scare the ever-loving shit out of them. Obviously, we had one too during that camp. We masked up as monsters and hid out in the woods close to the checkpoints they had to pass. While running in between checkpoints, I found an open stretch of forest with little to no foliage, so it was ideal for chasing after them. There was no real room to hide besides behind trees, so I couldn't use my flashlight or they'd be able to see me from miles away. It was dark, like the unsettling kind of dark that plays tricks on your eyes and you start imagining things that aren't real. During my stay there, I saw a shadow that was around my size running past me a few times. I couldn't see it very well, so I just assumed I was imagining things because nothing was there when I turned my flashlight on. The game was nearing its end and I saw the shadow again. This time I could see it vaguely standing near a tree, not too far away from me. I thought it was one of the other leaders hiding to scare kids and decided to go over there as it was about time to go back. I aimed my flashlight towards the tree, and while getting closer, I noticed that there was indeed someone standing there dressed in what looked like a torn burlap sack and had their head covered with a few white plastic bags that looked like they were tied together. I started to feel pure dread. Something felt really off. I asked if everything was okay, but they didn't respond. The only thing I heard was this weird sound that sounded like someone knocking on wood. Nevertheless, I went a bit closer until I was about 10 meters away from this person. The knocking sound turned out to be that person smacking his head repeatedly into the tree, and I noticed he looked like a male. He was barefoot, and his arms and legs were covered with crusted mud. His hands were in a weird, cramped position. I was convinced this was just one of the other leaders pulling a prank, so I told them to knock it off. He slowly turned his head and started walking towards me. Something inside me just told me to run. It didn't matter if it was just a stupid prank, and I ran away scared for nothing. If this wasn't a prank, it felt like I was in serious danger, so I ran as fast as I could. I heard him running after me, but I didn't want to turn around to look, as I'd probably run into a tree. I arrived back at the campsite, and every single person that could be dressed like that was already there. They couldn't have gotten there before me, and if they did, they sure as hell didn't have the time to change into their regular clothes. Still, I told them, and that they gave me a good scare with that. They just looked weird at me, thinking I was trying to scare them, and we left it at that. Next day, I wanted to go check it out. Who knows? Maybe some weirdo ate the wrong mushroom and might be out there dying from hypothermia. I took someone else with me just in case, and there was nothing but endless trees. We arrived at the tree, where I saw the person banging his head, and there was a dead, skinned, decomposing rabbit nailed to the tree. We called the cops. They looked around quickly and brushed it off as just a prank from another scouting group or some kids from the nearby town, and left it at that. The forest does not forgive carelessness. It waits patiently, gathering strength in its darkness, and then it pounces when you are weak, scared, or alone. This story didn't happen to me, but to a huntsman I knew. His name was Stepan. He was a man of few words, tough as flint, and he had no reason to lie. Besides, after this incident, he left the forest and drank himself to death. It happened in August. Stepan was returning from a distant ranger station. He decided to take a shortcut through the old cemetery. That's what we called a section of the forest where locals were buried during the war. No one went there. Even mushroom pickers gave it a wide berth. It was a cursed, swampy place. But Stepan didn't care. He had walked there 100 times before. Dusk was falling. The forest became damp and sticky. Fog began to creep from the ground, white, thick as fresh milk. Stepan walked quickly, making his way between moss-covered boulders and crooked fallen crosses that had long since rotted, and then he heard crying, a thin, desperate child's crying. A child was weeping. Stepan stopped. His experience told him a child in the forest at such a time meant certain death. He shouted, "Hey, is anyone there?" The crying stopped and then started again, but closer this time. Stepan walked towards the sound. He saw her by an old grave slab, half sunk into the earth. A little girl, about 5 years old, in a white, dirty dress, barefoot. She sat hugging her knees, trembling all over from cold and fear. Her hair was light, hanging in tangled strands. He couldn't make out her face in the darkness. "How did you get here, little one?" Stepan shrugged off his backpack and took out his flashlight. "Are you lost? Where are your parents?" The girl lifted her head. The flashlight beam caught her face in the darkness, and Stepan went cold. The girl's eyes were black. Not brown, not dark blue, but completely black. Without pupils, without whites, like two bottomless pits. And from these eyes, tears streamed down her cheeks. They flowed without stopping. Stepan took a step back. His legs felt like jelly. "Uncle," she drawled in a voice that held nothing childlike. A creaky, dry voice, like the rustle of autumn leaves. "I'm cold. Take my hand, uncle." She reached out her hand towards him. The hand was skinny, grey, covered in some kind of cadaverous spots, with long, unnaturally long fingers, on which grew not fingernails, but black talons. Cursing under his breath, and reciting every prayer he remembered from childhood, Stepan spun around and ran back. He ran as he had never run before in his life. Branches whipped his face. Roots grabbed at his feet. The fog swirled behind him as if alive. He didn't look back. He heard behind him, not running, but a rustling sound, as if something was being dragged along the ground, and a thin, pleased laughter that made his blood run cold. He burst out onto the riverbank near midnight. He fell onto the sand, gasping for breath. He looked back. The forest stood like a black wall. Silence. Only his heart pounding somewhere in his throat. He decided he must have imagined it. Overwork, nerves playing tricks. In the morning, when it got light, he went back to get his abandoned backpack. He found it quickly. The backpack was lying right there by that same grave slab he had seen in the dark. The slab was old, mossy. Stepan scraped off the moss to read the name. The name was carved in uneven letters. Anna, 1938 to 1943. A child who died during the war from hunger or bombs. Stepan crossed himself, about to leave, but his gaze fell on the ground next to the slab. The ground was damp, and clearly imprinted on it were footprints, small, bare child's footprints. They led from the slab deep into the forest, and next to them, on either side, there was nothing. But the prints were strange. They didn't go in a straight line, but as if their owner had constantly been twirling and dancing. And where the girl had passed, on the moss and grass, there were not drops of dew, but some kind of cloudy, salty drops, from which the grass instantly withered and turned black. Stepan stood for a minute, looking at these footprints disappearing into the deepest part of the forest, from which the morning mist had not yet cleared. Then he turned and left forever. He never again picked up a gun or entered the forest. He used to say that the forest is not just trees, it is a living thing. And sometimes it shows you things you are not meant to see, especially at dusk, especially near old graves.